everyone, and welcome to the beginning of our cyber chats for the fall of 2021. I am Mark Loepker, the Director of Education for the National Cryptologic Foundation, and with us is Jennifer Langdon, who is my comrade here with the cyber chats. So I'll be kicking off today's session, and Jennifer will be watching the Q&A, and we'll conclude the session when we're finished. We're very happy to have Kaitlyn Knabe with us as we start off the session this year. She is an undergraduate student at Purdue University studying cybersecurity. And today we are having a great session on digital cybercrime, digital forensics. This is one of the areas that Kaitlyn is really interested in. And so we're very happy for her to share what digital forensics is all about. So Kaitlyn, over to you.
Thanks, Mark. I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen really quick. So a little bit about me. As Mark said, my name is Kaitlyn. I am a senior at Purdue University studying cybersecurity. My focus is in digital forensics. It's what I'm super passionate about and what I love. I'm originally from Los Angeles. I've had a lot of experience in the cybersecurity field, lots of different areas. So my first year, I worked for a government defense contractor. I worked for the FAA, specifically doing everything that has to do with networking and planes and ground communication. So basically making sure all the planes stay up in the sky. My second year, I worked for Charles River Associates doing cyber forensic investigation and consulting. And what that looked like was companies would come to us and say, hey, I think we've been breached. Can you look at it? And we would go in and say, yeah, one of your employees clicked a bad link. This is what the attacker could have potentially gotten access to. These are the other accounts that were affected. These are the steps you need to do next, that kind of thing. So that was kind of my day today. Last year, I worked for Deloitte, so another big consulting. I did a little bit different there. I did cyber and strategic risk. And I focused on cloud security, so making sure companies' cloud infrastructure was safe. Right now, I work for law enforcement, so I'm really working on cybercrime right now. I work for my local high-tech crime unit where we do digital forensic crime scene analysis. So super fun. So kicking things off, right? When we're looking at digital forensics, first we need to define it. So the first part of this definition here is a really common one, and that is the application of computer science and investigative procedures involving the examination of digital evidence. I'm going to get into digital evidence a little bit later, but that's the general definition. However, all those items listed in blue below it are key parts of digital forensics and ultimately what make up forensics as a whole. And that is following proper search authority. So that means making sure you have consent to search any device you receive. Chain of custody, making sure that if, let's say, a phone is passed on from a detective to me as a forensic examiner and then back to the detective and back to the person that owns it, making sure all of that is documented and clearly stated. Validation with mathematics means that we have to ensure that all of the evidence we get in hasn't been changed. So that's validated with mathematics. Use of validated tools. Forensics is a very tool-based profession. And how I like to explain this, I guess, is let's say you have a photo and you want to edit your photo. So you put it in a photo editor. And that photo editor does everything for you because it knows exactly what to do. That's its specialty. And you have a perfect photo. And then you can change and make little details to the photo yourself. So we use a lot of tools in forensics that do a lot of things for us, but we need to understand the details in order to be successful. The next thing is repeatability. And that's just making sure that if you do a process and you give that same device to someone else and they do that same process, they get the same exact results as you do. Reporting, I'll get into that later, but that's super important. and possibly expert witness testimony. And that's just making sure that you can go to court and talk about any of the analysis and evidence that you collected. There's 4 types of digital forensics, and this is really important and will really help break down this field. So the first is computer forensics, and that's really where it all started, right? Computers were the first things we got access to, individuals. But when we first got access to computers, it wasn't like internet and web and all of that. It was mainly just text. So maybe you could play a game, you could write a letter, you could write an write an essay, not an email. But the foundation of that was all that stored on memories and hard drives. And that's really what computer forensics is all about, right? So let's say we get a computer in, we use memory and hard drive evidence to solve the case. And that's how computer forensics starts. Mobile forensics is a little bit newer in terms of history. Same thing goes for mobile forensics. When we first got phones, people only talked on them, right? And we've seen a huge migration past that. Now people like myself, I'd rather FaceTime or text message. I barely talk on the phone. And now we have things like email, GPS, maps, apps, games, social media, right? We have all of those new things. And basically what all of those things are in digital forensics is a bunch of little treasure troves of evidence. And mobile can be a cell phone, it could be a tablet, an iPad, any of those things. And that also includes social media like Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all of those fall under mobile forensics. The third one is network. And what network forensics really looks at is how are all these things communicating with each other, right? So with a cell phone, we're able to make calls because of cell phone towers. And so that's how cell phones are able to connect to one another, and we can text and call people all around the world. With computers, we connect to networks or Wi-Fi or that kind of thing, and that's how we communicate. But network forensics really looks at how are these devices communicating with each other? Why are they communicating with each other? Who's sending these communications? Who's the communication going to? All of that, all of those kind of things go into network forensics. And then the fourth is cloud, which is by far the newest and also the one with a whole lot of questions for the forensics field, because I know a lot of people joke that, oh, it's in the cloud, it's just somewhere up there. Who knows, right? But as a forensic examiner, that's super important, right? So who's responsible for the data in the cloud? Who's securing the data in the cloud? How do we as a forensic investigator get access to that information? What kind of access do we get? Those are all questions that come up with cloud forensics. So with all 4 of these, right, you typically start with one specialty. So my specialty is mobile, right? But with that, digital forensics all is interconnected. So while I start at mobile, I touch all 4 of these all the time, right? So that's an important thing to note. I'm going to go over a little bit of an example case. Now, this is a law enforcement case, and this is based off a true story. But how this works is we have Susie, and Susie's dating a guy named Will. But Susie also has an ex-boyfriend named Joey. And how it works is Joey is super jealous of Susie's new boyfriend, Will, and misses Susie and wants to get back together with her. So what Joey decides to do is he decides to text Susie and tell her that. But Will finds out that Joey is texting his girlfriend, and he gets really angry. So what happens is Susie's at soccer practice, and Susie left her phone at home. So Will decides to devise a plan and text Joey on Susie's phone, pretending to be her, and tell him that she wants to meet up with him at the school park at 9 p.m., right? And this is where we get into our crime. So Joey goes to the park to meet Susie and is very excited about it. But instead of Susie being there, it's Will with a group of his friends. And so what Will's plan was he was going to beat up Joey to teach him a lesson to stay away from his girlfriend. But what Will and his friends didn't know was that Joey had a gun on him. So when Will and his friends go to beat up Joey, Joey pulls out the gun and lets off gunshots. Now the shots don't hit Will or any of his friends, but they hit the school building and a couple cars. And what happens is the cops arrive. Joey and his friends had ran away so fast because they were all scared and wanted to leave the scene. But Joey was still there. And the cops try to question all these students, but no one's talking because no one wants to rat each other out. So as a law enforcement, Joey gives us consent to search his phone to back his story, what he was telling us. And Will's mom gives us consent to search Will's phone. Now that's super important. So my question to the audience right now is, now we have these two phones, right? What kind of things would you do next? We have these two phones, what would you look for, right? What kind of digital evidence could we collect from these type of phones? Thinking about that, right? Here's some things that we as an examiner could look at. And a really important one is geolocation evidence. And a really important forensic concept is Susie's text message. So law enforcement asks Susie if she sent that message, and she says, no, I didn't send that message. It wasn't me, right? Us as a forensic examiner, we see the message from Susie's phone with Susie's name to Joey. So how do we know it wasn't Susie sending that message? And this is a big concept in forensics, right? While it may look like someone sends a message, it could not be them actually sending it. And that's also when we interview suspects, the big excuse is that it wasn't me. I didn't touch it. It wasn't me. It must have been someone else. I didn't send that, right?
Kaitlyn, some of our attendees are saying the phones could tell time and place, kind of like what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. Time and place. So it goes perfectly, right? So we request information from internet service providers and want cell phone tower locations of when and where that text message to Joey was sent, right? And it says the text message was sent from Susie's house. But Susie was at soccer practice, and there was witnesses placing Susie at soccer practice. So Susie couldn't have sent that message. Well, then who was at home? Well, Susie's mom confirms Will was over at Susie's house at that time. So it is probable that Will sent that text to Joey. Another really fun, which I thought was really cool when I first got into forensics concept, is geofencing. So this school in particular isn't surrounded by a lot of homes. It's kind of out in its own place. So we can ask Google and be like, hey, Google, here's this location, these coordinates. Can you tell us what devices were on that field at this time at night, right? And so Google comes back and says, there was 5 unique devices, mobile devices, on that field at that time. So what do we know from that? Now we know that Joey and Will were both there. And we also know that 3 of Will's friends were there as well. We don't know who they were, but we know there was 3 other people besides Joey and Will there. So that helps corroborate Joey's story, right? We can also look at text messages. We can look at Snapchat messages between Will and his friends, right? Even though on Snapchat, you send it and it disappears, that does not mean it's disappeared from everything, right? So Will and his friends had been planning the beat up attack over Snapchat messages. So now we have those messages that say that. Deleted photos. Another big concept of forensics is even if things are deleted, they're not necessarily deleted, right? I like to explain this as you have a trash can at home and you throw away your trash, but that trash sits in there until that trash bag is full and then it's taken and thrown into the dumpster, right? But that whole time, right, when it's not being taken out to the dumpster, it's still sitting in the trash and you can still go pick it out of the trash if you wanted to. So that's another thing. TikTok videos, right? That's another, there's a lot of evidence on there, more than you think in some cases. So those are some of the things we could have looked for. And the next really big, important part of law enforcement cases in particular, and all forensic cases, is the forensic process. And you will see these in all forensic classes you're going to ever take ever, right? So there's 5 key parts to the forensic process. And the first is identify what needs to be investigated, right? We can look at a phone and notice there's 70,000 emails. Do we necessarily want all 70,000 emails? Maybe not, right? The second one is preserve data so it's not lost or corrupted. And this can be really hard, right? Because sometimes suspects will know that we're going to go seize their devices. So what do, right? They delete all the files they had. They might set their devices on fire, smash them, destroy them, like try to stop us from getting any evidence possible. So preservation is super important. And the third is extract information following proper legal methodology. And this is what we call being forensically sound. And this is probably the number one part of this process. Because, so let's say you go through the whole length of the case, you collect the evidence, you analyze the evidence, you solve the case, you write the report, everything's all good. But let's say you never checked to see if you had consent to search a specific device. Guess what? Now, all of that evidence you just collected is not admissible in court, right? So you're letting a bad guy go free because you didn't follow the proper legal methodology. So it's so important that you are really tracing your steps and making sure you're following all those points. The fourth one is analyzing the information. And this has to be done in a non-biased way. So you might be going through someone's phone and you see text messages that you don't agree with at all, right? You can't judge a person based on that. You're trying to solve a case. And they are innocent until proven guilty, not guilty until proven innocent.
Quick question. Getting legal permissions to access cloud storage could recover destroyed evidence?
Okay. So with destroyed evidence, like I explained, it's deleted, but it's still unallocated. So unless it was completely wiped from the device, then it will still be there and it would still come up in legal requests. When you analyze information, another important thing to consider, like I was saying before, if you have 70,000 emails, are you going to go through all 70,000 emails? Absolutely not. So let's say you have a person that's selling credit card numbers, right? You might filter those emails for any email that says credit card in it or payment or specific numbers, right? And so now your 70,000 emails come down to 300, right? That's a lot more manageable. And that's a really important part in digital forensics and analysis, is being able to break down those details. And the fifth thing, which I talked about in the very beginning, is reporting, right? This is probably the second most important part, which is surprising to a lot of people. But let's say you solve your case and you write up your report and you give it to the judge. And the judge says, this isn't relevant. And you're like, well, why isn't this relevant? This is, I did it, right? Well, because of how you wrote it, the judge doesn't understand anything you're saying and doesn't understand the technical concepts that you're trying to convey. So they think it's not relevant. So a question all digital forensic examiners have to ask is, can non-technical people get it, right? Can people understand what you did and how you did it? And that's another super important part. Now, moving forward and looking at, how can you guys get involved in digital forensics? Or what might set you up to be a great digital forensic analyst? So some of the skills are, maybe you're good at puzzles. Maybe you're a really analytical thinker and have great attention to detail. I know I loved crime shows, which I can let you know that crime shows are not like what digital forensics is in real life, but I love the idea of solving puzzles. And I loved all my video games to solve crimes. I always loved that. Those are super important skills to have. And if you have them, you might be really good at digital forensics. But the fourth thing, which is a little bit more technical, is cybersecurity knowledge. So I'm a cybersecurity major. An important thing for us, right, is in order to stop an attacker, you have to understand how the attacker works. So you basically have to be an attacker before you can prevent an attacker, right? You have to know where, if I was going to attack this system, where would I go to? What would I be looking for? What would I be trying to steal, right? So that me as an examiner would be like, oh, I think they would do that, so let me look here. I think they would understand this part of the system, so I'm going to look here, right? So that cybersecurity knowledge is super important. And with that, 4-year degrees are super important in the digital forensics field. You'll typically see a lot of people in cybersecurity and computer science with 4-year degrees, or there is some schools that offer forensics-focused degrees. There's not a lot. But you can also be in any degree you want and still do this.
Question.
Yeah.
So is there any one type of forensics that foresees all the other different types?
Of the 4?
I think that's what they mean, yes.
No. Like I said before, typically how it works is you'll get into one before you'll get into the others, whether that be because of interest or be because of the role you get placed in is focused in that one specific area. But forensics covers all 4. So computer, mobile, network, and cloud. And so if you do digital forensics, you're likely to do all of them. So the general field covers all of them, and you're likely to do all of them in your career if you are interested in becoming a digital forensics analyst. Some of the typical backgrounds you'll see people in these positions have are law enforcement, penetration testing, and how I like to explain penetration testing for those that don't know is just being the bad guy, trying to break into things. So companies will hire you to try to break their stuff, to get into their stuff so they can understand where their weaknesses and vulnerabilities are. And like I said before, 4-year degrees are super important in the forensics field. Now, looking at some resources that can get you started, we have the data care booklet, which I don't know if Jennifer or Mark, you want to talk on it all, but that is a resource available to you guys.
Yes, at the National Cryptologic Foundation website, we have a middle school booklet. Students, teachers, anybody can download and read. So it has lots of information that you can find there. Thanks, Kaitlyn.
And other things are starting to learn different operating systems. I'm a big Mac user. I love my Mac. Before I came to college, I really had no experience in the other operating systems. But another thing, right, is if you get a device in to analyze and it's Windows, you kind of have to start to understand where a user is going to click, where they're going to store their files, all those kind of things. So just being familiar with the different operating systems is super important. Cyberseek.org has a lot of job postings, but I know for a lot of younger people that means nothing at all. They also have student resources, but I find it really helpful to look through job postings and kind of see what qualifications they're looking for. Things like skills they like to see in their hires and that kind of thing, and helped me guide kind of where I wanted to go when I was just starting. And lastly, YouTube tutorials on forensic tools. Like I said, forensics is really tool-based. These 3 tools here, Autopsy, Forensic Toolkit, and Wireshark, all 3 of those are free tools, so you could download them on your computer right now if you wanted to. And YouTube has some fantastic tutorials online on fun ways and things you can do with those tools, and that will give you a huge edge moving forward and also be a great test to you if you even want to try to see if forensics is anything you would like to do. That would be a really great test, is download some of those tools and see and start to learn them. I'm going to close out there and open up for any questions that haven't been answered already.
Is this all just detective work? Like, do you have to be a cop to do forensic analysis?
No, definitely not. So I'm a civilian, right? So I have no cop experience. The people I work with, one of them was a cop prior to working. He just got sick of cop work and decided to wanted something new, so he came into forensics. Another girl I work with, she came straight out of college. She worked in college and then went and worked at a lab and then came out to West Lafayette and started forensics from there. So she's a civilian too, has no legal background at all. Yeah, you definitely don't need a legal background at all.
The tools, like how would I get practice, with my forensic tools? You mentioned a couple that were, like the operating systems, but you also mentioned things like autopsy. Like, how can I get a hold of things like that to learn how to analyze computers?
So autopsy is a great one. Autopsy is open source. So if you literally look up autopsy online, you can download it on your computer through the download link. And then if you go to YouTube and search up autopsy tutorials, right? A lot of them will give you files to download. So kind of like a walkthrough tutorial, fun kind of thing. I know like a lot of computer science programs have like websites where you can like learn computer science in that way. Forensics isn't like that, right? So it's a little bit more self-made. But you can download that tool, go to YouTube, watch a tutorial, download whatever walkthrough they're doing, and then go through that with them. That's a really, really great resource. And all those sources are free. So Forensic Toolkit, Autopsy, Wireshark, you can literally just Google them online and download them, which is super fun. But if you want to work on operating systems, another option for you is to download VirtualBox, which will let you download virtual machines. So let's say you have a Mac computer, you can download VirtualBox and then download Linux onto the VirtualBox and then work in like almost in a little separate virtual machine in there and try to play with it. There's tons of tutorials online for that as well. So
that was super, super answer. We have a couple more questions. Do you have to hack into a database for digital forensics? Is our first one.
So as in digital forensics, I don't do any hacking, right? So in forensics, let's say someone does hack into a database. Our job wouldn't be to hack in. Our job would be to say someone did hack in. That did happen. I understand that someone hacked into this database, but then our job would really to be, why did they do that? What information do they want? What is this database? What kind of information does this database hold? What potential information in this database do these people have access to, and how will that affect the people that have information on there, right? So we don't do the hacking, but there is cybersecurity knowledge involved, right? We have to understand that someone did hack the database, right? We have to know somehow that, but we aren't physically doing any of that.
On average, salary for somebody who's doing digital forensic work?
That's a great question. I'd say entry level is around 80,000. So that would be what I'd be entering into right now. I would say people with experience, you're talking 6 figures. So more in the 100,000s, middle, high for experienced forensic examiners. That's just my general idea, but I might be wrong.
Do you need to study anything about laws or legal work to do digital forensic work? Where is there some crossover, or is it just you need to know about computers?
So this is really fun because I started working for law enforcement this year. I had no legal background whatsoever. Forensics is one of those things where you learn on the job regardless, wherever you are, right? So I worked in corporate, which is not law enforcement, not dealing with crimes at all. This is people clicking on phishing emails kind of deal. And I learned the legal aspects of that just from working and from my coworkers. In law enforcement, I didn't know legal at all, and that's really important. And I learned from my coworkers. So there's it's great to understand kind of how the legal system works, but it's not necessary right before you get into it, right? You learn.
Do you need a cybersecurity major, or can you major in something similar?
I'd say it's probably even more common to have it. Cybersecurity is still very hard to find as a major. It's very new. So it might not feel new, but it's very new. There's more graduate programs than there is undergraduate programs for cybersecurity. So with that, it does limit your options. You see a lot of people in computer science. You might see people in data analytics. You might see people in poli science. There's some business majors. You absolutely don't have to have a cybersecurity degree. I will say it definitely helps, right, to have that knowledge. But as long as you have those like soft skills, you're fine, really.
Is this type of work done virtually or on site primarily?
So if you were to ask that probably 3 years ago, it would be primarily on site. Now, because of the environment change of the world, there is a lot of virtual happening. It really depends on the situation. So like in corporate, right? If they have a ton of servers and you need to go out there, you're going to have to go out there on site. But if it's one device that was attacked, they can just send the device to you. And so you can do that virtually. So it goes both ways.
We have another question about, I guess, the workday in a digital forensic analyst life. Like, how long would you work typically?
So forensics is a waiting game. And I say that because in order to process a device, right, we talk about all the fun analytics and, getting down to the detail and understanding what happened. But a large part of that is just waiting for things to process. So like you plug the computer in and you wait for everything to come out and get all the data. And that takes a really long time. Not a really long time, but that will probably take half of your workday, right? So you're working multiple cases at once in a general day. So in like a corporate setting, right, you get a case, you might start processing in the morning so that it can start getting through it, but you might have another case that was already processed. So you might spend half the day going through evidence, deciding what's important, what's not important, following the trail, finding little details, all of that. So that analysis will take a lot of time. And then maybe the latter half of your day, you're report writing, right? You're writing what happened. You're making sure you're documenting all the steps you took, all the evidence you took, making sure you have that report to give to either the client or your boss or something like that. So I'd say those three parts are part of every day, right? You're processing, you're analyzing, and you're reporting, right?
Another question in a different direction. So when investigating the why behind a cybercrime, is a psychology background important? Or have you met anybody with maybe differing backgrounds that also do digital forensics?
Yeah. So some of my biggest role models at school all have psychology upper level degrees, and they're like leading digital forensics researchers in the country. Psychology is definitely emerging. It's a big research field coming up. The like psychology behind a hacker and digital crime scene analysis. Like how are these bad guys interacting with computers on a daily basis? And is there any sign we can tell why certain people do the crimes they do on the internet? So psychology is a very growing facet of forensics, and I think that is like the coolest thing ever, because you can do behavioral. I was always obsessed with criminal minds and behavioral analysis, and you can absolutely do behavioral analysis of digital evidence, and so that's very growing.
How can I keep my information safe?
You have the cliche answers, of course. Passwords are at the fundamental critical aspect of everything, right? Make sure your password is at least 8 digits. That's probably the number one thing. If you can do multi-factor authentication, or they ask for your separate password, that is an amazing resource and is what, in all my jobs, we've told all of our clients that they need to do. That's like the number one security thing. Also, just be really conscious. If you have public social media accounts, what you're posting, right? Everyone can see that. I, as an examiner, can see that, and I can know where you live, who your friends are, what you like to do on the weekends, right? It's a little bit scary, and everyone has access to that. So that's another thing to make sure to keep aware.
Where should I start? Like as a high school student or to your degree, like what can I do to like really get into digital forensics?
Like I said before, playing with the tools, or even not even downloading the tools, just watching tutorials. It would be really great to, maybe try out computer science, see if you like coding, maybe try out different cybersecurity areas that you might be interested in. Start looking up school programs for forensics, kind of see what classes they're offering, what kind of things are they teaching their students, and maybe that can give you inspiration to look for books. Books are an amazing resource. There's a lot of digital forensics books you can order on Amazon and look through those. That's a great starting point.
What does coding have to do with in digital forensics? Like, where would you use that?
I don't do coding much on my day-to-day. Mainly, in order to analyze certain data, you need to run it through scripts, which I'm not sure of the technical level of knowledge on that, but you might run it through a program so that it filters out certain data for you automatically, which just makes life easier as an examiner. But for me, coding was my starting point before I got into cybersecurity. I tried coding and I was like, I really like this and I love how I'm interacting with computers, but I don't necessarily know if I love coding. And then that's what got me interested in cybersecurity. I was like, well, cybersecurity is a little bit different. It's like security, it's not necessarily coding. And that's how I got into security. And then from security, I was like, well, I love like the analysis aspect of security. What can I do? And I was like, digital forensics. So I think when I say coding, like trying it out, for me, like that was a really important stepping stone for me. And there's so many resources in high school and middle school level to learn coding, Khan Academy, code.org, all of those things. And I think like just figuring out what you like and don't like in the tech field will really help you out long term.
Well, we want to thank you so much, Kaitlyn, for a wonderful cyber chat. And thank you all for coming and participating with us today. If you enjoyed today's chat, Kaitlyn has another talk with us you can check out titled Making and Cracking Codes in Math, or Is Math. Make sure to be here for our next chat, Bots Battle for the Internet, next Wednesday, October 6th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And if you still have questions or you have questions about other things related to cybersecurity, and you want us to explore specific topics in cybersecurity with your class, let us at the National Cryptologic Foundation know. Thanks again. Bye-bye.